Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and not as always, I'm not going to go through the explanation of what Namaste and in Lak'ech means. I'm going to refer you to previous videos so that you get a more broad view of the work that we've done in the past. So check it out and see what those two mean. More importantly, though, once you do, try it on for size. Approach life from that perspective and see what kind of a difference it makes. Don't believe me? Test it for yourself. All right, great, thanks. So this week's episode, we're welcoming Kevn Herring, who hails from Tucson. He is the president and founder of Ascent Management Consulting Limited. And he's one of these guys that's actually found something and stuck with it. He's been at this for over 25 years. Most of us, I know in my degree programs, there were something like 10, 13 career changes in normal life today. So he's been rare and very successful. He's also the VP of Administration and Executive Committee on the Board of Directors of the Boy Scouts of America for the Catalina Council, which is in the Tucson area. And with no further ado, Kevn, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I am really curious, like many, all my guests, there's been some inkling when they were younger of this greater connection with reality, with the universe, well, however you want to call it. But there's this specific inner connection that you begin to develop, or at least become aware of.
Mm-hmm.
You're not able to do anything with it yet, but aware of. What kind of things happened with you when you were young?
That's a great question. And you're right. Some people from a very young age know exactly what they want to do, or at least are so well connected with what they have a passion for that the path is pretty clear. Like I have a son who loved to tear apart computers and rebuild them from a very, very young age. And he's an IT guy. And it
Right.
was inevitable, right? I did not have that experience.
I took my mother's cabinets apart, but I never became a cabinet maker.
There you go. There you go. But I would say it was kind of an evolution for me. And I was not aware of it until I was an adult, that I really had a kind of a passion that I could make tangible. I could really understand and wrap my arms around. Mm-hmm. As I was growing up, I had a variety of jobs like a lot of kids do. And I found that there were some things about them that they had in common that I really liked. And the jobs that gave me a lot of latitude to do the work, where I was not very well supervised. I just knew what I had to accomplish. I had to pretty well work independently on my own and be out doing the work. And I could decide how to get the work done and how quickly I got it done and all that kind of thing. That I found was best for me in terms of my ability to really perform at a high level.
So it sounds like you were more self-initiating than most. Then would you say that to be true?
Well, I think, yeah, I think I would say that I have what I would identify now as a high need for closure, and I need to accomplish something and see it done. And that gives me a sense of satisfaction. I loved washing dishes. My mother would have me wash dishes. I loved washing dishes. We didn't have a dishwasher. Well, we did. It was me.
Right.
But I loved doing that job because I had the freedom to decide how to do it. And as long as the outcome I produced was satisfactory, everybody was happy. And I had a sense of satisfaction in the accomplishment. So I think that was one piece of it that sort of followed me through my growing up years.
So it's kind of like the old adage of when chopping wood and carrying water, chop wood and carry water. It gave you that sense of being in the moment and focusing completely on what you were doing until it was done.
Yeah, yeah. And I've always been a little analytical. I loved playing football and studying Bear Bryant's plays. And being the guy who called the plays, designed them, and so on. Again, I didn't sort of make a connection with any of this until I got older. And the interesting thing is, I was always very introverted, very shy kid. But I found over time, I had experiences that helped me sort of gain an appreciation for people, I found everybody has a story, and I love hearing their stories. And I found I have a curiosity about that. I've always loved history,
Mhm.
not the dry history that I hated in school, but once I got a teacher who brought it alive, I found I loved history, and I still have a passion for history. Again, learning about people.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, when you were younger, though, let's peel back
Uh-huh.
and step in the Wayback Machine a little bit and go to your story, right? So when you were, let's say teenage years, because this is usually where we begin to kind of explore ourselves, the world around us, and ask questions that don't seem to have answers yet.
Hmm.
What was that period like for you?
I was a difficult child.
For
I don't know how
you,
else.
for difficult for yourself, or difficult for your parents, or a little bit of both?
Oh, for my parents and leaders in general, teachers, I was always a questioning kind of person, always wanted to understand the why.
Hmm.
And when I didn't understand, I tended to challenge it. And I think my dad always took it as challenging authority or rebelling. I don't think he quite understood that I
Curious.
was, yeah, I was not only curious, but I was suffering because I didn't have that closure. I needed
Ah,
closure on it, and it bothered me. And if there was a sense of injustice somewhere, I just had a need to see that fixed, that corrected. And so, as a teenager, that was difficult, I think, for a lot of my teachers and certainly for my parents at times.
well, having been a teacher myself and worked with teenage kids, and I'm one of those weird ones that loved the challenge
Hmm.
because it allowed me to practice the Socratic method
Mm.
and turn it back on them and ask them, well, what do you think?
Hmm.
Right? Because I found, and maybe you too, the critical thinking skills in youth today are deplorable. Um,
Hmm. Yep.
they just don't have them, which means that they've even not been taught them at home, and school certainly doesn't empower that. What what did you find when you were younger that gave you that ability to develop your critical thinking skills in spite of the pushback you got from questioning everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I know the answer to that. I have wrestled
That's
with it a little.
fair.
I mean, I've wrestled with that a bit myself, trying to figure out why. Is it just the way I'm wired, or was there something in my growing up years that caused that? I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that my father was in the military and we moved around a lot, and so I was always having to do things to understand new circumstances, new surroundings, new friends, new people, and that sort of thing.
Well, it's
Uh,
interesting you mentioned that because there are some ancillary side effects, let's say, that happen unbeknownst to us as we're going through things that we don't necessarily recognize, oh, until later, right?
Yeah, sure.
Um, so it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I would think that perhaps our audience could reflect on what happened to them during that age and what they went through and how those things came about. And then perhaps how they were able to reflect on it later in life
Mhm.
and notice their own growth in the process and how sleuthful they were in getting through that and making it to adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some don't. Uh, right. Still act like a kid most of the time.
Yeah, some of
Uh,
us are still working on
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. But don't grow up. It's a trap. Um, it's in the more so in this attitude, and you seem very young at mind still as well, or young in mind, um, because you're still kind of curious and the desire to be helpful has been present, and especially in the business world. Now, as you transcended into your um, young adult life and school and I don't know what college, uh,
Hmm.
those areas and things like that, what did you find was a common thread in your own experience that brought that future vision of yourself into greater focus?
Yeah. So there are two pieces of that. One is my understanding or awareness that I really enjoyed people. I liked working with people. I liked helping people. And I liked getting to know and understand what makes people tick. So that was one piece of it. And again, I think a lot of that had to do with my growing up and the experiences I had moving around different places. And
Yeah, you're always meeting
right,
new people and trying, figuring out how to make new friends.
right, yep, exactly. And the other piece of that is I always looked for ways of improving the work when I had jobs. I was always interested in sort of analyzing it and looking for better ways, more efficient ways to do things. And I had this unique experience where I stumbled onto a self-directed work team, an accidental self-directed work team.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had a summer job. I was just starting college. I had a summer job working in a food dehydrator factory on the assembly line. Fascinating work.
Okay.
It was a summer job.
Could be depending on, yeah.
Right. So it was a summer job. So I took this job, and on day one, somebody from the office walked me out into the assembly line area, this huge room, and they had a U-shaped assembly line, and took me into the middle somewhere and introduced me to one of the workers and said, can you teach Kevin what he needs to do and kind of help him get going and learn whatever he needs to learn to be successful? And the kids, sure. I thought he was the supervisor or something, but no, he was just another line worker there on the line. And so I'd been there, I don't know, a week or two, I think. And I asked, who's the manager? Who's the supervisor? I've never seen anybody. They said, yeah, you probably won't see him much. He's out in the warehouse, got other duties. We don't usually see him in here. And so everybody just worked independently of the manager. They just worked together as a group doing the job. And here's the funny thing. Every day, or not every day, every week, sometime during the week, somebody, I didn't even know who it was most of the time, but somebody on the line would go up to this board at the front of the room and write today's goal and put a number up there. And it was always somewhat higher than where we had been, what we had been producing up to that point. So let's just say, I don't remember now, but let's just say we were at 50 units and they put up something like 58 or 60 units, today's goal. And people would just go along through the day. And as we got close to lunchtime, every once in a while, somebody would call out to the end of the line where the packaging group was, packaging and shipping, and say, how many units? They wanted to see where we are against that, where we were against the number. And somebody would call back and give them a number. And after lunch, things kind of went back to everybody was doing their job. And about halfway through the afternoon, somebody would call out again, what's the number? And they'd call back. And as we got closer to the end of the day, the call outs became more frequent. And we were all working faster and faster, trying to achieve this goal. And we always accomplished it. And then our production after that would hover around that goal, a little higher, a little lower, but usually somewhere around there. And then the next week, somebody else would just randomly put up another number, right? And we'd do the same thing. We were increasing productivity probably 10% every week or two. I mean, it was astounding. And at the end of the day, when we got the number, we'd all just sort of cheer, some high fives and that kind of thing, and go our way. I don't think anybody knew what we were doing. The manager didn't know. The people up in the front office had no idea. Nobody came in and congratulated us or said, great job, gave us a bonus. There's none of that. It was just something the group did all on its own.
And that's just an amazing experience, how you took this natural desire to, first of all, to have fun at work, right? Yeah. And this natural, not necessarily competitive, and yet competitive in the sense of reaching the number, where you worked as a team, and who knows how you all did it, but you all stepped up and figured out those little intricacies in your own individual activity that was able to accentuate the larger. That's just an amazing experience and a really good lesson to learn at that age, because it shows you what people can actually do. Here's the good one. Happy people get more done with less supervision, and they will surpass any of your expectations given the tools and talent to do so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let me throw another interesting piece of that. The makeup of this group was very diverse. So we had a fair number of college students.
Hmm.
We had some married couples, probably in their 30s, 40s. We had a pretty sizable group of people who were refugees from Southeast Asia, families that were struggling with language barriers
Hmm.
and all the normal things that people have to deal with when they immigrate, particularly under difficult circumstances like that, particularly difficult. And they had multiple families trying to live in a house together, sharing the expenses and coming in doing these jobs, and the whole family would come in and work. Some of them spoke, I don't think, any English. I mean, it was very difficult to communicate. A few of them were professors or English teachers or some kind of teachers back in their home countries, and so they had some pretty good English skills, and they would translate, or interpret. So we had a very interesting, diverse group of people on this line, all uniting together toward this common goal that we just sort of created on our own. And I asked the people I worked with on either side of me on the line, what got this started, right? My curiosity just kicked in. I mean, why are people
Sure.
doing,
Why? How?
right? Yeah,
What the
how did
heck's
this
going on
happen?
here?
And people had been there the longest. I don't know how it happened. It just kind of seems like it always was this way. And I think we just did it to make it more interesting, to make it more fun. And
Hmm.
so we have a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment when we go home each day. And they did other things. They would help each other out on the line if somebody was kind of getting bottlenecked and wasn't able to keep up, and then we'd switch places or go help other people out. And people moved around the line freely to ensure that things kept flowing smoothly. And it was just a great experience. It was
Old rat
fascinating.
had nothing on you, huh?
That's right. That's right.
Eliyahu, I think that's his first name, the goal.
Yep.
Right. He
Old rat.
really unpacked a lot about how to deal with bottlenecks and remove them. And
Yep.
he's
Absolutely.
something you guys just found early on and did it. Uh, the amazing thing I see in that is the multi-generational as well as the multi-language, where
Hmm.
neither one of those came into effect. You all worked in unison to do that. And it also reminds me of Dee Hawk's chaotic management style.
Right. Right. Yeah. It was fascinating, and I think for me it was a learning experience, to have my eyes open and see what was happening. And I wanted to understand it and figure out what I could do to contribute to make it even better. And I knew at that point I wanted to be in a situation where I could create organizations that worked like that.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
So let's okay. So this is an outer experience with the results and the whoopee kind of
Hmm.
thing, right? So what was going on, if you can remember or recall it or dive in a little further? How were you reflecting on that internally? What was going on? How did you feel? What did you think? What were things that you went through that you didn't necessarily share with the group, but that you saw as pertinent to your own development in awareness and understanding?
Yeah. Well, I saw opportunities to expand cross training. There were other, where we had a limited number of people moving to different areas to help each other out, and I recognized an opportunity for everybody to be able to do everything, and how convenient that would be, so
Hmm.
that we were truly multi-skilled. The ability to put something, the needs of the whole group ahead of our own individual wants and needs was tremendously powerful. As I saw how people were willing to do that, we as a group were able to create something greater than we each could individually if we were all working in our silos,
Sure.
right? So there were a
We
lot
have
of,
too many silos today that don't know about each other and are
yeah,
competing with each other for trivial reasons. Our our world is not in good shape because of that. With
absolutely.
great respect.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of the divisions, because our inability to try to understand each other points of view, and to be willing to let go of what we want in the moment
Mhm.
to step back and have that dialogue, have that conversation, see what we can learn from each other and see what we
Absolutely.
have in common.
Yeah, it's like Covey's fifth principle, right? Seek first to understand,
Yep.
um, and
Yep.
then be understood. Now, again, let's go back to that
Uh-huh.
inner place. You addressed it from fulfillment standpoint, I guess.
Mhm.
I'm looking at how did you feel? Was there a connection that you had, or it almost sounds like this was a natural thing you didn't have to think about. It was just part of you, which is pretty rare, and yet so precious to have in that way early on, to have that kind of understanding where it comes from, whether it's, parents, lineage, who knows, it's just built in.
Mhm.
uh, Now, how did you take that into uh, spin it out into a larger career aspect, and what was the
Yeah.
process for that?
Well, it's funny because at that point I knew I had a passion for wanting to build great workplaces, places where people could bring their whole selves to work and really contribute their best, grow, develop, and have that sense of accomplishment each day when they go to work, satisfaction of what they've accomplished and done. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I like business. I like helping business to be successful, and I recognize the connection between that kind of workplace and business results. It was obvious with that accidental self-directed team, right? And so I wanted to learn more about that. And so I was in school. I was majoring in psychology, and I knew it wasn't quite a fit for me. It just wasn't where I wanted to be. I had a brother-in-law who was on the campus at the time working in the student counseling area in the business school.
Mhm.
And I had just come back from a counselor, a school counselor, and talking about my program and my major, and just felt like I had a bad experience. I didn't get any direction. I had no idea how I was going to take my passion and turn it into something. And so I just kind of walked across campus, thought I'd just drop in and see my brother-in-law. And we had met before my sister. In fact, I had introduced him to my sister and they got
Ah,
married. um, but so he and I had a lot in common and enjoyed each other's company. And so I went over to talk with him, and he asked what was going on. I told him about my frustration, not knowing what I wanted to do and how I was going to get there once I identified it. And he started asking me questions about my interests, my passions, and so on. And so I shared a lot of the things I just shared with you. And he stopped for a minute. And he said, you know, you're describing what I would call what I would consider the field of organizational behavior. And I said, what's that? He said, well, it's a relatively new field. Now, this is many years ago. It's a relatively new field. And it's you can only find it in graduate programs, but there are a few of them around the country springing up. You might want to check into that. We even have one here. And so he
how
got me the
convenient.
how convenient. And so I looked through the material and I was hooked. And I arranged to meet with a couple of professors and talk about the field. And I knew that's where I wanted to be. And that's where I started, and went to University of Minnesota, got a bachelor's degree in industrial organizational psychology. It was the beginning, and then graduate school at Illinois, where I studied organizational behavior, and the kind of classes, half in the, actually more than half in the business school and the other in the uh, organizational behavior side.
Sure. Now, so this kind of, I've got a couple of master's degrees in business, and I had
Mhm.
a lot of, like you, I had a lot of experience younger before that. Um, did you find that your degrees only validated what you already knew, and maybe fine-tuned it a little bit more as to how to apply it better? Or were there some major learning experiences in the degree programs as well?
I would say it was both.
Okay.
It was both. Absolutely validated some of the things I already had come to understand and believe.
Just put names.
But right, right. And technically, though, it also helped me understand organizations more technically. So I understood more about organization structure, for instance, and how structure affected how people worked, and the kind of workplace that gets created from that, and how people lead and manage in those types of of environments.
Yeah. Straight line and dotted line communication,
Right. Yeah.
reporting and all that kind of stuff. And you're right. In any size organization, especially larger ones, you get into that really almost a soupy mix that you really have to be careful and aware of all the spices within it, the personalities, the talents, the skills, the aptitudes, and be able to put that into a proper framework for it to become its own entity.
Yeah. And I also started seeing contradictions between what we were getting in our organizational behavior, industrial psychology classes versus some of the more traditional accounting classes in the business side, where we were taught the importance of pushing controls, pushing decision-making to those at the lowest level of the organization. And then in the accounting program, they were teaching people about control and finance, about controls, and how, we need to set up for proper financial control, which we have to do. But if we take that to extremes, which a lot of organizations do, we're now talking about 2 and 3 and 4 levels of sign-offs for very low level purchases. And pretty soon we sort of strip away the personal accountability and empowerment that people have, the latitude that they have to access and control the resources they need to serve the customer or to.
And not only that, you increase the time frame that's available to do so.
Absolutely.
When you're adding that, you could be adding days, could be adding weeks.
Yep.
I had an experience in the aerospace industry where, you would, I worked with a lot of engineers in production control. And so whenever we'd have a manufacturing change order, that took at least 2 to 3 weeks unimpeded to get through the system without any extra help.
Yep.
Fortunately, there was a couple of times where we needed stuff pretty quick. And I said, well, hey, can we do this? And I walked a piece of paper through in 6 hours, and which would have normally taken 3 weeks. And I came back, silly me. I asked my general supervisor if he thought that could be done before I shared the paperwork.
Oh.
Right. So it's like, no, I can't. Well,
So you asked for forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I just wanted to see if it could be done, what others thought. And it was really easy to do. And I couldn't understand why it wasn't done more often, because it made things much more effective, especially when you dealt with people kindly. And in the aerospace industry, it's very militaristic and control centered, and it wasn't a kind place for most people.
Yeah.
And my Midwestern values came in, right? I was like,
that's right.
Everybody like you want to be treated. So I did. And I rose to the top of the production charts, and they couldn't figure out why. And he finally came to ask me. And, it just seems like you noticed, right, that there are certain things that just seem to make sense. And the challenge is to make that sense common. We talk about common sense, and it's kind of not.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you make things like that common sense? How do you bring that to an organization, to the individuals, first of all, because they have to really understand it in order to implement it, no matter how the high level activity looks?
So it's interesting is when I've worked with clients and in any company for that matter, the core workforce is they're always hungry to have more latitude in decision making. They're always hungry to have better access to the supplies and the equipment, the things they need to do the work. And they want to help each other more. They want to do a good job. They want to have more meaning and purpose at work. So it's an easy sell for them. They're ready for it. What happens is they go to work somewhere and they expect those things to occur as they have maybe in the past or were hoping for.
Right.
And they find it doesn't
reasonable
happen.
Anyway. Those are reasonable expectations.
Yeah. And little by little, they find that things aren't the way they anticipated they would be. They don't have access to the resources they need. There are too many controls in place. They have to have so many sign-offs. They're being micromanaged, told how to do every little thing. They're told they can't do things they know need to be done for the business to be successful, because the leader says, that's too out of control for me. I can't keep track of that. I need to make sure you're in a particular swim lane and you stay in there. And so people make decisions to not do what's in the interest of the business to stay in that swim lane. So you see a lot of that happening, but most people, given the opportunity, in my experience, want to do a good job. They want to have a good experience at work. The leader determines what experience they have because they have a stance about people. They either believe that people really are self-motivated, or they believe they're not. And they have to be watched, checked up on, motivated, driven, whatever, to get the job done. And that has a huge bearing. That belief about people has a huge bearing on their intentions as they engage with people and the practices that they employ as leaders in the business.
Oh, absolutely. It's, the matter, to put it succinctly, it's where you focus your attention, intention, and interaction. That's where your results are going to come. And if you're not willing to go there, it's like, what is it, 20-60-20 rule, where you've got 20% top performers and 20% low performers. The other 60% will go lean towards the lower performers because that's what the boss allows. And so there's a reticence to hire slow and fire fast.
Yeah, right. But the key is the leader. The leader has by far the most impact on the conditions that people find themselves in when they come to work. Those conditions they work in are driven by those leader practices. And so if we can help the leader to identify their stance and confront it, if it's detrimental to the engagement of the employees, right? If it's detrimental, then we get them to take a hard look at that and recognize the need to change. And if they're not readily accepting that the change is worth the effort, then we ask them to take a leap of faith, to say, look, I understand this doesn't feel right to you because that's not the world you're coming from, but
you're not used to it. It's an unknown.
Yep. And a lot of employees are like that. Employees don't see the opportunity because they've only worked in places like that where they've been micromanaged. They haven't been able to really bring their heart, minds, and hands to work. Just their hands were all anybody hired them for.
Yeah, you wanted to go someplace else with that.
But that's the issue, right? I mean, I think, and so when we talk to them about these opportunities to use their creativity, their expertise, their learning and all, and apply it to the work to do something bigger and better, sometimes they struggle because they've never had the opportunity.
Sure.
And they're not sure how that works.
So let's look at, if we could look at that a little bit and unpack the kinds of things that leaders, in your experience, tend to, I guess, general behaviors, general outlooks of those who have not been able to institute the observer's self.
Yeah.
And watch their own behavior and at least be aware enough of what it is, not necessarily they can do anything about it yet, but at least to be aware that, oh yeah, I know I do this, right? Do you find a lot of that, or do you, and in the slow to change, and conversely, do you find the quick changers to be much more self-aware and ready to make that change?
No question of
figure out what it is.
Right. No question. Those who are self-aware and already kind of in learning mode, they understand that they don't know everything, and they're always trying to become a better leader and serve their team better and get better results. Those are the types that will embrace it quickly and be very successful. But those who are sort of entrenched in what I call a trust low, control high leadership style, if they're entrenched in that, it's the only way they know, they have to be pretty motivated to want to try something different. And we've had experiences where I've had boards call me in to work with a CEO who was low trust, low control, high, and trying to decide if they wanted to keep them. And I've had a number of those experiences where I worked with them, and I counseled the board in all but one case. I counseled them to keep that CEO. They wanted to get rid of him. And I said, no, I've done the analysis. I've met with them. I've met with the team. I understand the circumstances. This person just needs to see that it's going to be supported, that they'll get the resources they need to make the changes. They want to be better. They're willing to do something very different. But it's going to be a difficult change. It's going to take a little bit of time, but if we work on it, we can get there. And
Sure.
I've seen amazing changes that people have been willing to make. But in the one case where that person didn't make the change, it was a conscious decision. Total resistance. No, I'm going to continue working the way I've always worked. I'm not going to be any different. I'm going to continue to be what I would describe as manipulative and difficult and controlling. And the board lost confidence in her and let her go, which is probably the right decision.
In that moment, I'm sure it was. Now, for that person, that type, what do you find, or what do you think? Because a lot of times they won't share what's going on in their inner workings. What do you think the reasons are for them being unwilling to explore that?
A couple of the most difficult things for leaders to deal with are feelings of control and vulnerability. They
Ooh,
like,
that's a big one, the V word.
right, the V word. They are they often will not accept or acknowledge their weaknesses, or that they even have any. I can't tell you the number of people that I've been asked to work with, leaders, executives I've been asked to work with. And in my first meeting with them, I'll ask them, okay, why do you think we're having this conversation? Why am I here? What got me here? What's precipitated it? And they'll say, I don't know. The HR VP said that I probably should talk to a coach. Okay, and why? What was the reason for that? Don't know. What kinds of things do you struggle with the most? I don't really struggle. I've kind of got everything figured out, doing pretty well. You don't have anything you need to work on that you could get better at? Well, we could always improve a little, but no, I think I pretty well got things figured out. Okay, that person is not a learner, right? They're not a learner. Now, do they really believe that? I find it hard to believe. I could not accept that. I think they know.
Well, that's the imposter syndrome in reverse, right?
Right. They know they know they have weaknesses. They don't want to know that anyone else knows that they have weaknesses.
Right.
So the emperor can run around naked, but and recognize that everyone else can see that, but doesn't want to hear anybody say it. Because that exposes that shame or embarrassment or whatever to the people around him or her. So that's the thing that we
so it
have
boils down to insecurity, right?
Absolutely.
And ultimately the imposter syndrome, because they don't want anybody to see that, and I know, I mean, I've gone through those periods myself. I'm sure you have as well. It's like, am I enough? Do I know enough? Am I good enough? I don't know. Well, let's find out. Right. And then still have the awareness that, okay, I don't know it all, so I better learn how to ask questions. And the better questions I ask, the better answers I'm going to get, and the more I'll grow from it.
Absolutely.
So how do we empower that in other, we've learned how to do that in ourselves. How do we help? Because it's not a prescriptive thing. You can't force it. You can't, lead a horse to water and smack them so that they, right? But how do we do that effectively? How can we nurture that leadership into places where it truly needs to be?
Yeah. So I think there are two influences on that. One is just the obvious situation where a marketplace has changed and demands a shift.
Mhm.
right?
Kind of like we've
And
got right now coming out of COVID. I remember,
absolutely.
what was it? And I don't care for Schwab. I don't care for the World Economic Forum or any of the crap that they're promoting. However, my wife and I decided to get COVID-19, the Great Reset book just to
Mhm,
see what they had to say, because it's good to
mhm.
know what others are thinking, right?
Sure.
Even though you may resist it, it's like still, it's the more you understand, the better you can deal with it. He said a couple of things in there. One regarding the personal aspect of it is, can we be caring and compassionate towards one another coming out of COVID? The other question that he asked is about business agility,
Hmm.
because things, doing things the old ways don't work anymore. And
Yeah.
so the more agile a business can be, the better chances of survival. So how does that come in? And that it seems to fit, kind of dovetail into what we're talking about.
So I like to bring reality into this. I like to get people to
Oh
talk about
yeah.
what actually happens. So, for example, I might tell a leader and say, okay, what happens when there's a customer who has a particular need or a problem that needs to get solved? Now, the way you're set up now is so they bring it up to somebody's attention, someone on your front line. That person can't do anything about it because they don't have any authority to. So they take it to their supervisor. The supervisor can't, so they take it to their manager. The manager can't, so they bring it to you. Okay. How long does that take? Can that happen in 5 minutes? No, that probably
No, it'd be
takes.
like it happened 5 days.
Exactly, exactly. And in the meantime, what's that customer thinking? And what's that customer going to do? Better yet,
Mhm.
well, the customer is going to go somewhere else. If they have that opportunity at all, they're gone in a heartbeat. Or next time around, they'll go somewhere else. They're not going to wait around while you work through your bureaucratic process.
Right. And most companies
Right?
only offer excuses or
Mhm.
attempt to, rather than saying, doing what they can to fix the stuff and
Yeah.
move on and be customer centric.
Right. And so the big question is, what impact is that having on your business? Right? What impact? So let's look at the impact. And so when we do that, we drill down and we start looking at the numbers and people start recognizing that's an expensive way to operate and it's not effective anymore. It may have worked in the past, but the way the marketplace is now, it doesn't work anymore because customers have choice, broader choice than they ever had before. So
Mm,
what are you going to do? Are you going to keep operating the same way and operate yourself out of existence, or are you going to do something different? You
sure.
know how to do what you're doing and you know what results it gets because you're living it right now. So what has to change for you to get a different result? Let's talk about that. And that gives us the opportunity to open that door for them to confront the current state reality versus where they need to be for in a successful future state.
Sure. Now, speaking of opening the door to reality, do you deal with many companies that rely on remote, easy for me to say, remote workers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you find is the trend in that? Are they treating these remote workers with a little more respect and freedoms to keep them, or are the same patterns still in existence?
It's a mix, and it's an interesting mix. Years ago, there were studies done about remote work with remote workers, asking how they liked remote work, and then asking people who worked at the office if they'd like to do remote work. And I think the increase in remote workers was something like 1% a year or something for years. Did not increase very much over the years prior to COVID.
Hmm.
And these surveys didn't indicate at all that employees were interested in working remotely for the most part. Now, I
Well,
think
they
there
had
are a
the
lot of
buildings to
reasons.
go to, right?
Right, you're right. But I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that too. I mean, they
Sure.
recognize that promotions and all that were dependent a lot on having interface with people in
Face to
the
face.
face to face and all those kinds of things. So there were a lot of reasons I think that people had for that. Of course, that all changed pretty dramatically, and particularly knowledge workers all became remote all of a sudden. I mean, by and large, a lot of people who were in computer work or accountants or decision makers, managers, just people in a variety of programmers, people, a lot of knowledge work were sent home.
Hmm.
And two things happened. One is most of them found they liked it. Even though they were working in many cases more hours, they liked it. And that's a huge shift. The
Sure.
other thing is that employers found that the work still got done, even when they
And
weren't
that
being
was the
wanted.
fear, right?
That was
And how are
absolutely
we
the
going to, we're
fear.
going to let these guys go home and we can't watch them?
Yeah.
Are we sure they're going to produce?
Hmm.
Right? Are we going to have to, because the hand holding's no longer there, uh,
Yep.
and the watchful eye, and yet the happiness quotient,
Hmm.
for lack of a better, went up. And because of that, back to that same statement I made earlier, happy people get more done with less supervision, and they'll, you
Yep.
know, outreach your expectations. So what do you think the trends are, or do we have enough history
Hmm.
in this last, or herstory, depending, um, to have a good idea of where the trends might be going and what we might look for, and more importantly, how to handle that with respect to the empowerment of the individuals?
Hmm. So there have been a number of people who have predicted that this would just continue to expand, this remote work situation. I always thought that was pretty unrealistic. I didn't think, because there are people who still, even though they're seeing better results, they're struggling with it, and
Aren't we built for community?
right. But yeah, we want people to be present. We want to be able to interface with them face to face, be physically present. And so certainly there's a pull to bring people back. Now, Apple has a group of employees that rebelled against the return to the office policy. And so that's been an interesting development to watch. But
What do you think the effects of that will be, and what do you see that bringing up as far as further questions in the
I think, number
marketplace?
one, they recognize they communicated ineffectively in that situation, that they should have brought people together. They should have had question and answer sessions where they could ask people what concerns they had about coming back to work, the office, and so on, and explain why it was important. Because in Apple and in most companies where innovation is a competitive advantage, you need people to be able to sort of bump into each other at the water cooler and that sort of thing. And that's what the Apple headquarters was designed for. So you can see how Tim Cook would be pretty anxious to get everybody back in that environment so that they can leverage that competitive advantage.
It was built specifically for that to happen. That
Absolutely.
was one of the key competencies of the
Yep.
company.
Yep. Exactly. So how do you manage that side of it when you believe it's important for the business to be able to stay competitive, but you have people saying, I like this remote work, I can still do my job, and if I don't get that opportunity here, I'll get it somewhere else, right? And then you have where you're losing people because they want to have that remote opportunity. And I
It's
think
fun.
yeah,
Go
I was gonna
ahead.
say,
You finish your thought.
yeah, so I think what we see is that um, some felt like that the return to the office, the numbers of people who would return to the office would be similar to what it was prior to COVID. Um, that's not happening. Clearly, there are far greater numbers of people still doing remote work than ever before, even though it's than we have maybe uh, in recent history. We obviously peaked out, and many more people are now going back to the office, but we still have a high percentage of people who are in fact working remote. And I think that's going to continue. And I think a lot of these are going to shift um, to hybrid kind of models. And I think we're seeing that
New
evolve.
business, entrepreneurial programs, or endeavors, things of that nature.
Well, that's a good point. That wasn't what I was thinking, but that's a good point. There is more of that happening. We are seeing more people wanting to do their own thing, be out there, hang their shingle and work as consultants. But you also have people who say, I'm happy to come into work a couple times a week, but I want to have a few days to work from home and have that mix of arrangements. And I
Mhm.
think that that's kind of where it's going to shift for a lot of people. Now, some people will clearly shift back to the office 100% of the time, but I think you'll see a lot of these hybrid arrangements where people are part-time at home and part-time at the office.
Do you
And you'll,
see a particular age range or generation that's more susceptible or maybe even more desirous of that kind of environment?
um, I think, I can say generationally that's the case, but I think it has a lot to do with experience. The fact that people had this experience recently, and it's not all for everybody. It's not a recent thing. My sons have been working remotely for years. Uh, in one's in IT, the others in product management, and
I've done
he
the same
hasn't.
thing. I've worked from home for over a decade
Yeah,
or a decade and a half now.
and he's worked for one has worked for several different tech companies, and he has never really had an office. He's worked from home. He travels a little bit, but he works out of his home office, and that's in every place he's been. That's been the arrangement, and he has a team of people scattered all over the country.
Mhm.
They were doing that well before COVID. So I think the trend had already begun. It sort of got forced with the
Sure.
COVID experience, but some young people are already used to it, particularly in the tech space.
That's kind of where I was coming
Yeah.
from in that, because it seems much easier for them to acclimate to that kind of work arrangement. Now, this kind of brings in another question of, I know back when we were growing up, our parents were, hey, find a good company, work for them until you
Mhm.
retire and then enjoy life. And so there was a lot of loyalty at that time.
Yeah.
That's pretty much gone away now. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are a few pockets where that occurs. I think you mentioned about defense industry. You still see some of that there, but the young people coming into the defense industry are in and out of there like a revolving door. It's
Hmm.
nothing like it had been. So you have this uh, bimodal distribution of people who have been there a long, long time and never will leave, and younger
Yeah,
people
because
who've
it's
been there.
comfortable. That's what they're used to. It
Right.
goes back to that, the fear of change,
Hmm.
right? No,
Yeah.
I'm too comfortable here, even though that really looks good over there, and I wish I was there. I can't go because I'm just too comfortable here and set in my
Yeah.
ways, and I'm, my retirement's coming up, and I'll be fine.
Hmm.
Right?
Well, and the social contract was such that there was an understanding between employer and employee that as from the employer's perspective, if you come work for me and keep your nose clean, don't get into trouble, and basically do
You're
what
good
you're
for
supposed,
life.
you're there for life, and we'll take care of you. And on the flip side of that, the employee's understanding was, okay, if I come in and do a decent job and take care of business and all that, I don't have to worry about um, finding other jobs, moving around the country, all that kind of thing. I'll be taken care of. I'll get a nice pension at the end of that 40 years or 30 years or whatever. And that has shifted dramatically because that social contract is now totally different, where employers see it as a short-term arrangement.
Mhm.
And their perspective is, you're a resource, you're an asset that we're going to bring into the organization, and we're going to use you up. Basically, we're going to get everything we can out of you to contribute to this business. And as long as we still can pull things out of you, then we'll keep you here. And when we can't, when we don't have that ability to do that anymore, then we're going to let you go. But to keep you interested during that time, we'll give you opportunities to learn and grow and take classes and go to seminars and all that sort of thing, and have different experiences so that you can build a career and have our organization as a platform from which to launch your next step in your career.
Sure. And when you're
Right?
treated like that, why would you want to leave?
Yes. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
When
So
you're treated that well,
mm,
which doesn't happen very often. So that's kudos for the company, the leadership, and even the employee for being able to be in the right place at the right time and land a job in the first place.
But here's the risk. Here's the risk with that, is the employer is saying that if I don't need you, the minute I don't need you, you're gone.
Mhm.
There's no loyalty. There's no long-term commitment here. And that could be a year. It could be 3 years. It could be 5 years. Most likely it'll be a lot less than 5 years.
Just speaking my experience in the aerospace industry, I started in 81, and within 6 months there were 3 layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I finally got it on the third.
Yeah. Yep.
And you know, by that time it was like, oh, take me, because I was too the stress level around me
Right.
was
Too
just
much turmoil.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah.
employees, in turn, employees on their side of the contract recognize it's a short-term arrangement. There are no long-term guarantees. And so the employees coming in say, okay, I'm committed to giving you, you know, what I have to offer, as long as you give me what I need to manage my career. So I'm not dependent on you. I'm not going to be dependent on you. I've got to manage my own career, because you're not going to do it for me.
Right.
And I'm going to be prepared. So I'm going to take advantage of every learning opportunity I can get from you. I'm going to just suck it out of you. And when I'm ready to make a move, I'll make a move outside the organization, because there's no commitment on my part to be here long term. So that's the new social contract.
So let's look at, okay, how have you seen, or can you imagine a new model emerging that would incorporate the best of both worlds in this state of being agile, so that the future actually becomes brighter than it might have been? And you know, you've been in a lot of different areas and dealt with a lot of different types of companies and individuals and things like that. So you got a pretty good bird's eye view of all of this. How do you see that evolving, or do you see it happening? And if so, what kind of model do you see might be best?
I do see it evolving. You mentioned how you actually have seen that, and that's the entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial in some cases type of model, where I think people, in order to be successful in our current situation of uncertainty, that they have to take more responsibility for their careers, and they have to basically become an entrepreneur. And I don't mean that literally, that they all have to start their own business, although in many cases that is what's happening.
Sure.
Right. But there are,
what you're talking about is being inside the entrepreneur, right? Where you're inside an organization, you're thinking entrepreneurially as opposed to just following the script.
Right. And you're thinking not just of what opportunities are in that organization, but you're looking more broadly outside to other organizations, and you're planning out in your mind what your career steps look like, and where you need to go to get what you want, to follow your passion and be successful.
So you're talking to another one of my guests expressed it as, especially in leadership, he calls it the ambidextrous organization, where there's the exploitation, which is what business is all about, and the experimentation. And oftentimes one or the other happens, but not both. And the ideal is to find that balance or harmony between the two, especially if you're going to continue to be in business. You have to have that innovation side, the experimental innovation, creative side, as well as the exploitive. Do you see that entering in as well? And is that a highly impactful element of the new models?
I think great leaders, people who truly understand what leadership is, get to know their people, and they know what their people need to feel like they're good contributors, they're satisfied with their work, they're engaged, and they're following a passion. They need to understand those things. I'm not saying they need to know every little extrinsic motivator of everybody in the company. I think there's overkill on that
and
belief.
Way too complex.
It is. It's way too complex. But if we just understand that there are some commonalities across people, that people want to be able to contribute, they want to have the ability to bring their creativity, their creative selves to the work. They enjoy being part of something bigger than themselves.
Mm.
And if we can create that environment and help people to be able to stay engaged, and that means sometimes giving them assignments or temporary leadership responsibilities over a project or something, or to take the lead on a specific set of tasks or something. If a good leader recognizes those opportunities to build their staff and to give them what they need to be able to continue to grow and develop, not recognizing that at some point in time, some of those people are going to outgrow those opportunities that you can provide, and they're going to have to go
Ultimately,
somewhere
don't
else.
you hope they will?
You hope, absolutely,
I mean,
because
that would
while
be
they're
the
there,
epitome of a leader, right? Because you're
absolutely,
always wanting to
because while they're
elevate
there,
others.
they'll want to be there. They'll want to continue to work on that team or in that organization, and they'll be intrinsically motivated and driven and engaged. So what more can you ask for,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. The reason I'm laughing is I was reminded of what one of my guests was the AR guy for David Bowie,
Hmm.
and traveled with them for years. And the guys in the band were studio quality. They could play with anyone.
Hmm.
And the reason they chose to stick with David was because of how he treated people.
Mm.
It was family. And
Yep.
that's how he responded towards everyone. And it was just an amazing thing, according to the A&R guy, because you don't see that often.
Hmm.
Most of it's business, not family. And
Right.
this is where it transcended that. So looking into the future, and we're kind of coming close on time here. If there were, first of all, who would you pick to give advice to in regard to leadership? Would you look at the budding entrepreneur, or the person just starting out as an employee who might have an idea or of a business in the future, or current leadership? And what advice would you give?
That's a great question. I have to characterize it a little differently. I think whoever
Sure.
wants to learn is the person I want to help. And so the
That's
answer would
that's the
be,
very first step, right?
right.
You have to want it before you can give it. Otherwise, it's like giving a teenager answers before they ask the questions.
Yeah. I love so part of what drives my passion is I love the experience of seeing people create something they didn't think was possible because they engaged their people better, and
Mm.
they implemented some new management practices and things that helped bring that about. And the light in their eyes, the smile on their face, I mean, the results that they produce are what really sort of drives me. I love creating that for people. And so if somebody wants to learn, wants to have that experience, I'd love to work with them. I'd be thrilled to help them succeed. And if they're not at a level where they've got a business or they have a team, but they want to learn those principles so that they can, when they have the opportunity, love to help them out. It doesn't matter to me where they are in whatever stage of their leadership journey, whether they haven't started yet or they're in the middle or well advanced. I'm happy to help them.
I may have missed the tasty tidbit there.
Hmm.
If there were one, and you could put it succinctly in just a general advice area, what
Yeah.
would that be?
I love helping people who are just beginning that leadership journey. They may be struggling a bit with just the basics of
Mhm.
supervision and communication, organizing, and directing, and all those kinds of things. And I like to help get them on the right path. So I always want to tell them, look, number one, always make people the priority. If you do what's right for people, you'll do what's right for the business, and make that your priority. And that means getting to know them at a deeper level than just employees who are hired to come in and do a set of tasks.
So what I
So
hear you saying is the internal customer is more important than the external customer.
that's what gets you to the external customer, right? Is
Okay.
to build the internal employees and service each other. And so I think the thing to do is you really want to help people to see the big picture, help them understand why they're at work, what the business is all about. Um, create a culture of connection where people are connected, not just to each other, but to each facet of the work. So they understand how they impact those things. And then helping them to learn to be mutually supportive, that it's not a competitive environment where everybody's competing against each other, but we're competing against our competitors in the business, other businesses that are our competitors. That's who our competition is. So our goal is to make everybody on the team successful. Somebody's struggling, let's help them be successful. And I give you do we have time for a quick example?
Oh, I'm sure. Why not?
Okay, let me squeeze this in because I think it's a great example of this.
All
So
right.
we had a group of machinists who had a new employee come in, was working on probation, and the superintendent of the shop was frustrated, didn't feel like he was performing up to par. And some of the more senior level machinists came to the superintendent and said, we think he's got a lot of promise, a lot of potential, and we know he's failing right now. Would you back off, give him to us, let us work with him over the next 4 weeks? And then when his probation will be over in 4 weeks, if he's not satisfactory, you do whatever you got to do. But give us a chance to work with him and see if we can help him be successful here. And so the superintendent agreed to do that. He backed off, said, he's all yours. You guys work with him. And they did. They took him under their wing. They taught him. They helped him learn the ropes. And he was an incredible machinist, very successful. The superintendent was thrilled to get him. He continued to produce at a high level. And I think, when you get people working together, helping each other to be successful, that experience is going to be the rule rather than the exception. And certainly once in a while, you're going to have somebody, and I still believe it's on rare occasions where somebody doesn't respond to those efforts or simply is not a fit, right? And just can't succeed in that environment. And you have to help them find an environment where they can be successful. And hopefully it's somewhere else in the organization, but it may not be.
Right.
And I had somebody I had to let go, worked in my group one time. Years ago, I had to let him go. And I had a conversation with them about their fit and their motivations and how the job fit with their passions and interests. And they were too upset, I think, to really hear it. But several months later, maybe 6 months later, I think down the road, she came back and said hi to all these former coworkers and asked to see me. And we talked, and she thanked me for that conversation and for letting her go so she could pursue something that was a far better fit for her, and how she was now happier than she had been in years. And so I think, we think in terms of not just what's convenient for us, but what's best for the person. It helps us to make better decisions.
Absolutely. Awesome finish. Thank you so much for your time, Kevin. This has been a great conversation, much more down to earth than the normal ones I've had. And I love it because before my production control job, I was a machinist as well in the aerospace.
Ah, there we go.
So I totally get that. Production grinder specialist, dealt with millions of inch tolerances.
Fascinating work. Absolutely
Oh,
fascinating.
absolutely fascinating. And the things you can do, and it's just amazing. And not everybody understands that. They'll take jets, everywhere, but they don't realize what it takes to make the engine.
Yeah.
And how well it has to fit. Well, super. Speaking of fit, how well it has to fit. Isn't that the kind of message for life, right? It has to fit, right? If it doesn't, if you're not having fun doing what you're doing, then you need to go find something else.
Yeah. You at least have to confront that reality, right?
Absolutely.
And figure out what's the next step for you.
Right. Well, good. Kevin, thanks so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me. What a great conversation. I enjoyed being able to connect with you on the show.
Oh, very good. And it was just enjoyment. I'm sure that, our audience unexpectedly will enjoy this just as much as everything else. All right. Well, thanks again. And namaste and in la catch. Thanks for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I will see you next time.